Marcus Sullivan stood at his kitchen window on Thanksgiving Eve, watching Montana's sky turn the color of old bruises. At 42, he had learned to read the warning signs. The Chinook winds that had been howling across his 800-acre ranch near Kalispell all day had suddenly died. That meant only one thing. A blizzard was coming, and it would be merciless. He poured another glass of whiskey and returned to his leather armchair by the fireplace, where David's photograph smiled at him from the mantel. 3 years since the accident on Interstate 90, and Marcus still set 2 plates at dinner out of habit. The house felt cavernous around him, filled with the ghosts of shared laughter and morning coffee conversations that would never come again. The first snowflakes began falling at 10 o'clock, fat and lazy at first, then driving sideways as the wind picked up with vengeance. Marcus had seen storms like this bury cars and kill cattle. He checked his emergency supplies one more time, then settled in to wait it out alone, just like every holiday since David died. At 11 o'clock, something cut through the howling wind, a sound so faint he almost missed it. 3 soft knocks, barely audible above the storm's fury. Marcus froze, whiskey glass halfway to his lips. Nobody came out here during weather like this. Nobody was foolish enough to be on the roads. When he opened the door, the blizzard surged into his house like a living thing, bringing with it a sight that made his heart clench. A young man, maybe 17, stood shivering on his porch, covered in snow that had already begun to freeze to his dark hair. His thin jacket was utterly useless against the cold, and his lips had turned an alarming shade of blue. The boy's voice was barely a whisper, chattering through teeth that wouldn't stop clicking together. "Sir, I saw your barn from the road. Can I sleep in your barn tonight? Just until the storm passes, I won't cause any trouble. I promise." Marcus had spent enough winters in Montana to recognize the early stages of hypothermia when he saw them. The kid was shaking so violently he could barely stand upright, and his speech was starting to slur. This wasn't about offering shelter anymore. This was about saving a life. "No," Marcus said firmly, stepping aside and pulling the door wider. "You belong inside. Right now." The young man blinked in confusion, ice crystals falling from his eyelashes. "Inside," he repeated, as if the word were foreign to him. Marcus didn't waste time explaining. He reached out and gently guided the boy over the threshold, his hand finding skin that felt like ice even through the wet jacket. The moment the door closed behind them, the howling of the wind became muffled, replaced by the crackling of the fire and the boy's labored breathing. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, already moving toward the hallway closet where he kept emergency supplies. "Caleb," the young man managed, swaying slightly on his feet. "Caleb Rodriguez." "Caleb, I'm Marcus Sullivan, and you're going into hypothermia. We need to get your core temperature up right now." Marcus's military training from his Army Reserve days kicked in. He had David's old bathrobe, thick wool blankets, and a space heater he could set up in the guest bathroom. As he helped Caleb out of his frozen jacket, he noticed the boy's hands were shaking so badly he couldn't work the zipper. "When did you last eat something hot?" Marcus asked, wrapping a blanket around Caleb's shoulders. "I don't remember," Caleb whispered, and Marcus felt his stomach tighten with worry. As Marcus ran a warm bath and heated soup on the stove, he found himself thinking about the night David died, how helpless he had felt waiting for the ambulance, knowing there was nothing he could do. But this time was different. This time, he could help. This time, he wouldn't lose someone to the cold and the darkness. When Caleb emerged from the bathroom an hour later, wearing David's old flannel pajamas and thick wool socks, color had finally returned to his cheeks. Marcus handed him a steaming bowl of chicken soup and watched him eat with the careful attention of someone who understood hunger. "Thank you," Caleb said quietly, his voice stronger now. "I thought I was going to die out there." Marcus settled into the chair across from him, studying the young face in the firelight. "What were you running from, kid? Because nobody ends up on a ranch in the middle of nowhere, Montana during a blizzard unless they're running from something terrible." The question hung between them like smoke from the fire, and Marcus saw something flicker across Caleb's features. Pain, fear, and something deeper. The look of someone who had been carrying a secret that was too heavy for such young shoulders to bear. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but inside the warm circle of firelight, two strangers began to understand that sometimes salvation comes disguised as chance encounters on the darkest nights of the year. Sometimes the family we need most arrives at our doorstep when we least expect it, asking not for much, just for a chance to survive until morning. If this story moves you, don't forget to like and subscribe to Heart Stories for more real tales of hope and chosen family. Thanksgiving morning dawned gray and silent. The world outside transformed into a landscape of pristine white. The storm had passed, leaving behind 3 feet of snow and a quiet so profound it seemed to press against the windows. Marcus found Caleb already awake in the guest room, sitting on the edge of the bed with the wary alertness of someone accustomed to danger. Over breakfast, Marcus watched him eat with careful, measured bites, dark eyes constantly flicking toward windows and doors. Marcus cooked comfort food meant to nourish both body and spirit. Buttermilk biscuits, sausage gravy, scrambled eggs with cheese, and strong coffee. It was a Montana Thanksgiving breakfast, the kind meant to sustain a person through whatever hardships the day might bring. "You're safe here," Marcus said quietly, refilling Caleb's coffee cup. "Nobody's looking for trouble, and nobody's going to find any." Caleb's hand tightened around his fork. "How do you know?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How do you know they're not already looking for me?" "Tell me about them," Marcus said gently. "Tell me who you're running from." For a long moment, Caleb said nothing, just pushed eggs around his plate with mechanical precision. Then, in a voice so quiet Marcus had to lean forward to hear him, the story began to spill out. San Antonio, Texas, Our Lady of Guadalupe Catholic Church, where his father, Deacon Miguel Rodriguez, preached about the sanctity of traditional family values every Sunday, a household where Spanish prayers mixed with English sermons, where his mother Isabel made tamales every Christmas, and his father led the church youth group with stern devotion. Caleb had known he was different since he was 12, but it wasn't until he turned 17 that he finally found the courage to speak the truth aloud. "Dad, Mom, I need to tell you something," Caleb said, his voice barely audible as he recounted the memory. "I'm gay." The silence that followed had been deafening. Then the yelling had started, not just anger, but rage that seemed to come from some deep, wounded place in his father's soul. "You've ruined this family's honor." Caleb repeated his father's words, his voice flat and emotionless. "You've brought shame on the name of God. There will be no aberration in this house." The belt had come out that night. His father's old leather belt with the heavy silver buckle that left marks that lasted for weeks. His mother had stood in the doorway crying, begging Miguel to stop, but she hadn't stepped between them. She had just cried and prayed in Spanish while Caleb curled on the floor and tried to protect his ribs. The next morning, while his father was at early mass, his mother had pressed $50 into his hands and whispered through tears, "Que Dios te proteja, mijo. May God protect you, my son." Then she had turned away, and Caleb had known with absolute certainty that she would never fight for him again. Marcus listened without interrupting, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup to keep them from shaking. When Caleb finished speaking, the kitchen fell silent except for the distant sound of wind whistling around the eaves. "I'm sorry," Marcus said finally. "I'm sorry they hurt you. I'm sorry they made you believe you were something to be ashamed of." Caleb looked up, his eyes bright with the unshed tears. "Are you?" he asked. "Are you sorry? Or are you like them?" Marcus stood slowly and walked to the kitchen counter, where he kept his keys on a small wooden bowl David had carved years ago. Hanging from his keychain was a thin silver chain, and at the end of that chain, a simple gold band. "David Miller," Marcus said quietly, holding up the ring. "We had a commitment ceremony in Denver 3 years ago. Small thing, just us and a few friends, but it meant everything. He died in a pileup on Interstate 90, coming back from a supply run to Billings." Caleb stared at the ring, then at Marcus's face, and something shifted in his expression. A wall coming down, maybe, or a door opening just a crack. "You understand," he said. It wasn't a question. "I understand what it's like to love someone and have people tell you it's wrong." Marcus replied, "I understand what it's like to lose family because of who you choose to love. And I understand what it's like to be alone with a secret that feels too big to carry." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Two men from different generations bonded by the shared understanding of what it meant to live authentically in a world that often demanded conformity. Outside, a sheriff's patrol car drove slowly down the county road, and Marcus noticed how Caleb immediately tensed, his body going rigid with fear. "I'm only 17, Caleb said suddenly. "If they find me, if someone reports me as a runaway, they'll send me back. And my father." He talked about conversion therapy, about places that could fix me. Marcus felt a cold anger settle in his chest, the same rage he had felt 3 years ago when David's own family had refused to attend their ceremony. "Nobody's going to fix you," Marcus said firmly, "because there's nothing broken. You hear me? There is absolutely nothing wrong with who you are." For the first time since arriving, Caleb smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "Does it get easier?" Caleb asked. The loneliness. Marcus looked out at the snow-covered pastures where David used to walk every morning before coffee, checking on the cattle and planning improvements to the ranch that would never get made. "No," Marcus said honestly, "but having someone who understands helps more than you might think." Later that afternoon, as they worked together to clear snow from the front steps, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Sheriff Patricia Williams. "Missing person report. Hispanic male, 17, possibly headed north out of Texas. Thought you should know." Marcus showed the message to Caleb, who went pale as winter sky. "How long do we have?" Caleb asked. Marcus looked at this brave young man who had survived rejection, violence, and a deadly blizzard to find his way to safety, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "As long as we need," Marcus said, "we'll figure this out together." Sometimes courage means protecting someone from the very people who should have loved them first. And sometimes family is what we create when the world fails us. Saturday morning brought crisp blue skies and temperatures that made the snow crunch underfoot like broken glass. The storm had passed, but it left behind a problem more dangerous than any blizzard. Word traveled fast in small Montana towns, especially word about strangers. At the Kalispell Diner, where ranchers gathered every morning for coffee, Tom Bradley held court at his usual corner booth, a weathered man whose family had worked the same land for 3 generations. Tom had the kind of influence that came from deep roots and deeper suspicions. "Marcus got some Mexican boy living out there," Tom was saying, his voice carrying over the clatter of coffee cups and breakfast plates. "Showed up during the storm, apparently. Ain't natural, if you ask me. Man living alone all this time, then suddenly taking in some strange kid. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the town's only licensed therapist, looked up from her newspaper with the sharp expression she usually reserved for particularly stubborn patients. Maybe the boy needed help," she said mildly, but her tone carried an edge that made Tom shift uncomfortably in his seat. Maybe Marcus was being a decent human being. Tom's face reddened. "I'm just saying it don't look right. People talk, and they got a right to be concerned about what's going on out there." Back at the ranch, Marcus and Caleb remained unaware of the growing scrutiny as they worked side by side in the barn. Checking on the cattle that had weathered the storm, the physical labor felt good to both of them, a way to work through the tension that had settled between them like fog. Caleb had proven himself surprisingly capable with the animals. He moved among the massive Angus cattle with quiet confidence, speaking to them in soft Spanish that seemed to calm even the most skittish heifers. Marcus found himself thinking that David would have liked this young man, would have appreciated his gentle way with living things. That afternoon, disaster struck in the way that made Montana ranching such a gamble against nature. A section of fence in the north pasture had collapsed under the weight of snow and wind, trapping nearly 200 head of cattle in a depression where the water lines had frozen solid. Without water, the animals would start dying within hours. With the ground frozen hard as concrete and snow still 3 feet deep in places, It would be back-breaking work to free them and repair the temporary barriers needed to keep them safe. Marcus and Caleb worked for 14 hours straight, breaking through ice with pickaxes, hauling water in 5-gallon buckets, and constructing makeshift windbreaks from whatever materials they could salvage. By the time darkness fell, they were both exhausted, soaked through with melted snow, and bonded by the kind of shared hardship that creates trust faster than months of ordinary conversation. It was during this crisis that Caleb saved Marcus's life. The old bull, a massive creature named Taurus who had soured half the herd, had been growing increasingly agitated as the day wore on. Stress made him unpredictable, and when Marcus bent to examine a broken water pipe near the bull's temporary pen, he missed the warning signs that Caleb caught from across the corral. "Marcus, move!" Caleb shouted, vaulting over the fence with an agility born of desperation. The bull charged, 2,000 pounds of muscle and fury aimed directly at Marcus's unprotected back. Caleb reached him just in time, grabbing Marcus around the waist and yanking him sideways as Taurus thundered past, close enough that his horns scraped the fence post where Marcus had been standing. They lay in the snow for a moment, breathing hard and staring at each other with the wide-eyed recognition that accompanies a close brush with death. "Thank you," Marcus gasped. "Jesus, kid, you just saved my life." Caleb grinned. The first completely unguarded expression Marcus had seen from him seemed like the thing to do. He said, "You saved mine first." That evening, as they sat by the fire sharing a dinner of canned chili and cornbread, the phone rang. Sheriff Patricia Williams's voice was tense when Marcus answered. "Marcus, I got a situation here," Patricia said without preamble. "Missing person report came through official channels today. 17-year-old Hispanic male named Caleb Rodriguez. Last seen in San Antonio, Texas. Families hired a private investigator, and they're pushing hard for a multi-state search." Marcus met Caleb's eyes across the room and saw the fear return, sharp and immediate. "How much time do we have?" Marcus asked. 48 hours, maybe less," Patricia replied. "The family's got resources, and they're not playing around. If you know anything about this boy, Marcus, you need to tell me now." Marcus looked at Caleb, who was shaking his head frantically, his face pale as moonlight. "I don't know anything, Sheriff," Marcus lied smoothly, "but I'll keep my eyes open." After he hung up, Caleb buried his face in his hands. "They're going to find me," he whispered. "They're going to drag me back there." Marcus knelt beside the chair and placed a steady hand on the young man's shoulder. "No," he said firmly. "They're not. I won't let them." But even as he spoke the words, Marcus knew they were facing a battle that would test everything they had built in their brief time together. Outside, the Montana night stretched endless and cold, full of dangers they couldn't see but could feel gathering like another storm on the horizon. The next morning, Tom Bradley drove his pickup truck up the long gravel driveway to the Sullivan Ranch, ostensibly to check on how Marcus had weathered the storm. In reality, he came to get a closer look at the boy whose presence had set the entire town talking. When Caleb answered the door, Tom's suspicions crystallized into something harder and more dangerous. "You must be the Rodriguez boy," Tom said, his voice carrying the weight of certainty. "Your family's been looking for you." Caleb's face went white, but his voice remained steady. "I think you have me confused with someone else." "Sir," Tom smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "No confusion here. Son, your picture's been circulating. Question is, what's Marcus Sullivan doing harboring a runaway?" The confrontation that followed would force both Marcus and Caleb to decide just how much they were willing to risk to protect the fragile family they had begun to build together. Sometimes the greatest courage isn't found in facing natural disasters, but in standing up to human prejudice and choosing love over fear. Tuesday morning dawned clear and cold, but the tranquility shattered at 8:30 when a black SUV with Texas plates pulled up the gravel driveway, followed closely by a second vehicle carrying a man in an expensive suit. Marcus watched from the kitchen window as three people emerged from the first SUV. A tall, severe man wearing a white collar under his dark coat, a woman whose face bore the hollow exhaustion of sleepless nights, and another man whose lawyer's briefcase gleamed like a weapon in the morning sun. Caleb froze when he saw them, his coffee cup slipping from nerveless fingers to shatter on the kitchen floor. "Papa," he whispered, the word carrying years of fear and longing in equal measure. Deacon Miguel Rodriguez strode up to the front door with righteous fury radiating from every line of his body. When Marcus opened it, the man's voice boomed across the threshold like thunder from a Sunday pulpit. "You're harboring our minor child illegally," Miguel declared, his English heavily accented but perfectly clear. "We demand his immediate return." Behind him, Isabel Rodriguez clutched a rosary with hands that trembled visibly, her eyes searching desperately past Marcus for any glimpse of her son. The lawyer, James Morrison, stepped forward with documents already prepared. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm representing the Rodriguez family in the recovery of their son Caleb," Morrison said smoothly. "We have legal documentation proving the boy is a minor who left home without permission. Continuing to harbor him constitutes unlawful detention of a minor." Marcus stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him to shield Caleb from his father's withering stare. The morning air bit at his lungs as he faced the three people who had traveled over 1,000 miles to reclaim a son they had driven away with violence and rejection. "The boy asked for help," Marcus said quietly. "I gave it to him. Nothing unlawful about Christian charity." Miguel's face darkened. "Christian charity," he spat. "You're an abomination corrupting our son with your perverted lifestyle. We know what you are, what you've been teaching him. I'm protecting him from people who should love him unconditionally." Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the anger rising in his chest. "People who should celebrate his courage instead of beating him for telling the truth." The confrontation escalated quickly from there, voices rising as accusations flew like thrown stones. Isabel began to cry, torn between her husband's righteous anger and her maternal instinct to protect her child from more pain. Sheriff Patricia Williams arrived 20 minutes later, her patrol car followed by a white sedan carrying a representative from Child Protective Services. Aurora Martinez from Child Protective Services was a soft-spoken woman whose mild demeanor concealed a spine of steel forged by years of fighting for children caught in impossible situations. "I need to speak with the minor alone," Aurora announced, her quiet authority cutting through the chaos of competing voices. The interview took place in Marcus's living room, while the adults waited in tense silence on the porch. Aurora's questions were gentle but thorough, designed to uncover the truth beneath layers of family loyalty and fear. Caleb told her about the belt buckle scars that still ached when the weather changed, about lying awake nights, listening to his father plan his enrollment in a conversion therapy program, about his mother's tears that never translated into protection when her husband's rage turned physical. When Aurora emerged 40 minutes later, her professional mask had slipped enough to reveal the deep sadness in her eyes. "Based on my interview and the evidence of previous physical abuse," Aurora said formally, "I'm recommending emergency protective custody pending a full investigation. The minor has expressed credible fear of further harm if returned to his parents' custody." Miguel exploded in fury, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking completely. "This is persecution," he shouted. "Religious persecution by a godless system that protects the perverted and punishes the faithful." The emergency court hearing took place that afternoon in the Flathead County Courthouse, where Judge Sarah Chen presided with the measured wisdom of someone who had seen every variation of family conflict that human nature could produce. The hearing lasted 3 hours. Miguel Rodriguez testified about his son's need for spiritual guidance and traditional family values. Isabel spoke haltingly about her love for Caleb while carefully avoiding any mention of the violence that had driven him from their home. James Morrison presented legal arguments about parental rights and religious freedom, painting Marcus as a predatory stranger who had exploited a confused teenager. Then Caleb took the stand. His voice shook at first, but it grew stronger as he described the night his father beat him with a belt, the threats of forced conversion therapy, and the choice between hiding who he was or losing his family forever. "I didn't choose to be gay," Caleb said, his eyes finding Marcus's across the courtroom. "But I do choose the family that accepts me as I am instead of the one that wants to change me into someone else." Judge Chen's ruling was swift and decisive. Under Montana law, 17-year-old minors could petition for emancipation if they could demonstrate both the maturity to make informed decisions and credible evidence that returning to their parents' custody would not serve their best interests. Temporary legal guardianship was granted to Marcus Sullivan, with the understanding that formal adoption proceedings would follow if both parties desired. Isabel Rodriguez broke down completely when the verdict was announced, her sobs echoing through the courthouse as she realized she was losing her son forever. Miguel stormed out without a word, his fury too great for speech. That evening, as they sat in the kitchen sharing a quiet dinner, Marcus and Caleb processed what had happened with the stunned disbelief of soldiers who had survived a battle they weren't sure they could win. "It's really over," Caleb asked, still hardly daring to believe it. "The legal part is," Marcus replied, "but families aren't made in courtrooms. Kid, they're made in moments like this, when two people decide to choose each other despite everything the world throws at them." Outside, snow began to fall again. But this time it felt like benediction rather than threat, blessing the quiet house where a new family had just been legally recognized and emotionally born. Love, it turns out, isn't always about accepting the family you're born into, but about having the courage to create the family you need. 6 months later, spring arrived in Montana with the sudden intensity of a curtain being pulled back to reveal a stage transformed. The snow that had brought Caleb to Marcus's door melted into rushing streams, and the ranch came alive with sounds of new life and renewed possibilities. On a warm May morning, Marcus and Caleb stood before Judge Sarah Chen in the same Flathead County courthouse where their emergency guardianship had been granted. This time, the hearing was a celebration rather than a crisis. The legal formalization of a bond that had been forged in blizzards and strengthened through months of shared work. The adoption papers transformed Caleb Rodriguez into Caleb Sullivan Rodriguez, a hyphenated name that honored both his heritage and his chosen future. Judge Chen smiled as she signed the final documents. "Family isn't just blood," Your Honor had said during the brief ceremony. "It's choosing to stay when staying is hard, and choosing to love when love requires courage." The idea for Chosen Family Ranch had emerged gradually during their long winter conversations, but it crystallized when they received a letter from Dr. Elena Vasquez informing them about 3 teenage clients who had been disowned by their families and were currently staying in emergency foster care. "These kids need what you found here," Elena had written. "They need proof that chosen family isn't just a concept, but a living reality." The legal paperwork to establish their nonprofit organization took months to navigate. But by autumn, they had received their designation and formed partnerships with Montana PFLAG, the Trevor Project, and several other organizations dedicated to supporting LGBTQ+ youth in crisis. The first Thanksgiving they hosted as Chosen Family Ranch was a revelation that exceeded even Marcus's optimistic expectations. 8 young people, ranging in age from 16 to 19, gathered around the table that David had built years ago from reclaimed barnwood. Their stories as varied as their faces, but their need for acceptance absolutely universal. There was Jamie from Missoula, whose parents had thrown him out after finding love letters from his boyfriend. Sarah from Great Falls, who had been living in her car since her religious foster family discovered her transgender identity. Michael from Butte, whose ranching family had disowned him for refusing to hide his sexuality. Marcus taught them practical skills, how to maintain farm equipment, balance a budget, and navigate the complex emotions that came with building new lives from the ashes of old ones. Caleb shared his own journey from rejection to acceptance, becoming a bridge between cultures and experiences that helped others see possibilities they hadn't imagined. Elena provided weekly counseling sessions, both individual and group, helping each young person process their trauma while developing healthy strategies for moving forward. Sheriff Patricia Williams, who had finally come out publicly after years of living closeted in rural law enforcement, volunteered as a mentor and advocate. Even Tom Bradley, the neighbor whose initial suspicion had nearly derailed everything, became an unlikely ally after witnessing the positive changes the program brought to young lives. The ranch itself was transformed by the energy and hope of young people, who finally had a place where they belonged. The barns rang with laughter and conversation in multiple languages. The gardens bloomed with vegetables that reflected the diverse backgrounds of their caregivers. Local news coverage brought national attention, and soon Chosen Family Ranch was receiving inquiries from across the country. Marcus found himself traveling to conferences and workshops, sharing their model with communities that wanted to create similar safe havens for LGBTQ+ youth. But the most meaningful recognition came in smaller moments. When Jamie graduated from high school and received a full scholarship to Montana State University, when Sarah found the courage to begin hormone therapy with the support of her chosen family, when Michael's younger brother reached out secretly, asking for help navigating his own coming out process, Isabel Rodriguez sent a letter that autumn, written in careful English that carried the weight of a mother's love and regret. "I pray for you every day. Mijo," she wrote. "I pray that you have found the peace I could not give you, and the love you always deserved." Caleb wept when he read those words, not from sadness, but from the complicated joy of knowing that love could survive even when families could not. Christmas Eve marked exactly 1 year since Caleb's arrival, and the ranch buzzed with preparation for their largest holiday gathering yet. 15 young people would share the feast, along with their chosen family of mentors, volunteers, and supporters who had made the program possible. As Marcus hung the ornaments that had once belonged to David, he felt his late partner's presence not as an absence, but as a blessing on everything they had built together. Caleb, now 18 and preparing to attend Montana Tech with a scholarship funded by their supporters, stood beside him decorating the tree. "David would be proud of what we've built," Marcus said quietly, touching the star that topped their tree. "He would be proud of what you built," Caleb replied. "What you chose to build when I showed up asking for nothing more than shelter from a storm." That evening, as snow began to fall once again outside their warm and welcoming home, Marcus reflected on the truth that had emerged from one desperate night and countless acts of daily courage. Family wasn't something you were born into, but something you created through choice, commitment, and the radical act of loving people exactly as they were. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts, and Marcus smiled as he went to answer it. Another young person stood on their doorstep, shivering in the Montana cold, eyes wide with fear and hope in equal measure. Caleb appeared beside him, no longer the frightened boy who had once stood in the same spot, but a young man confident in his ability to offer others the same grace he had received. "Come inside," Caleb said, stepping aside to welcome another lost soul home. "You belong here." Have you ever had to choose between the family that gave you life and the family that gave you love? If Marcus and Caleb's story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your own stories of chosen family in the comments below. Here at Heart Stories, we believe everyone deserves a family that celebrates who they are, not who they're expected to be.